Dizazuka. This search will be focused on the question of the earliest converts to Nietzscheanism, who seemingly, so especially Max Nordau, where one can see how the genealogy of Nazism goes through Max Nordau to the Nazis, and then back to the and then it's already existing in the Zionism of Nordau. So we have here, in the simplest language, we have here this sudden shake-up of the hatching out of it, like a super powerful form of skepticism. So Nordau says, after reading Nietzsche and after cursing Nietzsche and writing a lot of bad stuff about Nietzsche in the press, he seems to have been inwardly gripped by Nietzsche. And so then he says, or this, I'd say this is the evidence from which we can draw the inference that it was Nietzsche that was at work. I mean, we know that he's read Nietzsche, we know he had all these works, but now we also have the statement that Nordau simply says flat out, there are no true moral edicts, there's only conventional commands. This is stated by Nordau in terms much harsher than Kelsen or much harsher than the legal theorists. It's so direct. I think it's seen more directly. And then aside from that, we see two other Jews, Weber and Simmel, producing the most authoritative text, which Leo Strauss describes as, in the case of Simmel, as sanitizing Nietzsche for the sake of the university. And then Weber didn't so much sanitize him as just sort of use him as the murderer of Plato, and then just say, okay, now we have to have the this new apparatus, the ideal types, rather than Plato's forms or ideas. In Plato, everything is as the structure of there's the truth, then there's the sense data, which is the images of the truth, and then there's painting, which is an image of an image, or a copy of a copy. And then therefore you can have an analysis on the basis of this original as the genus type, and then the species under it as the accidents of that, or the copies, as it were, the imperfect copies of that thing, of that perfection. But in Weber teaches instead, the ideal type is something like, you just make something up, like the pretense of a quote-unquote symmetry, facial symmetry, and on the basis of something that doesn't exist at all, you call this your ideal type, and then you say, statistically, this is the variation this face has from this imaginary thing that we're giving the technical term symmetry. I mean, in regular, almost all faces are basically symmetrical in the vernacular sense, so you have to have their technical sense of symmetry, which is then linked to the Weberian ideal type. You could treat that, I mean, it wouldn't make any sense to treat it if we treated it as a Platonic idea, right? Because it's like, then what we'd be doing is saying something like, there's symmetry, And here are the specific cases of symmetry, and well, in a way you could still do it. I suppose the big difference is it's so totally artificial, is that you just grab the idea in the process of trying to prove something. I don't know, in a way there is an interesting, I suppose Weber kind of uses the ideas in a way that's similar to the way terrorism or Nazism uses legal commands, lawful commands. So it's like they just keep saying, yeah, there's all these different versions of lawful commands, because that's what lawful commands are. They're the things that help us to get our purposes done. That's sort of, in a way, that's Plato still exists in the scientific method, I would say, so far as it uses Weberian ideal types or does post-Frank Knight economics, which is interestingly a question that has come down through Hayek, Popper, to George Soros, and I suppose maybe to Alex Soros, is he's cognizant of this type of question of the dispute about rational expectations and this other question. I mean, I'm sure he is. It's obviously he is cognizant on it, but I don't know if he's really said anything about it publicly on his view as of his father's theory of the modification of the expectations to no longer be rational expectations, but to be something else. So yeah, Nordau invented the most terrifying sort of trickster concept that sort of like reverses and tears into this whole field of once we have this region of sort of the total skepticism, but in these specific forms of legal positivism, then sort of weaponized. And there's a statement you can get of that also from Carl Schmitt, and I mean, not saying exactly the same thing, but I'm saying if you look at it, it seems to fit the pattern is of something about it's only recht if it's nutzen for the Volk or something like that. It's useful if it's useful for the people. So yeah, that's already in Nordau as alongside this concept of the Entartung, which the Nazis made famous as talk of the degenerates and the degenerate art and the social Darwinianly degenerate in the sense of genes, which should be removed from the vote. But yeah, you also have this same thing with ideas and with art, right? So you look and you select and you say, yeah, I mean, that's the joke you get sometimes, that the Nazis being, in a certain sense, very sophisticated, and being art collectors, they want to collect George Braque. They want to collect the really good, most. They want to they're standing at the most advanced outpost, and but the Führer, he's kind of a postcard painter. He was kind of more. He wasn't really that interested in reading the latest books by Boris Groys or whoever is now read. I mean, I remember Boris Groys said like 30 years ago or something that it's become the case now that people who do art history as a PhD always routinely reproduce an entire new version of art history as their thesis. So that that level of whatever at the time was sort of the highest level of thinking about not just the aesthetics or the visual experience, as maybe, I mean, Rembrandt, besides from thinking about a few technical issues like the shadows, but which ultimately served technical proficiency of creating the image. So basically thinking of the visual image itself, all these questions that involve the things that gave rise to these petite cubes, or however they were called by Matisse, which became the Cubism. There's an art that involves ideas becomes more and more prevalent ever since Nietzsche's time, and then I mean even before Nietzsche with the Balzac's unknown masterpiece at the time of the death of Hegel was already sort of an incipient notion. The painter studio has this sort of break from the Parisian Academy version, and this type of thing had already begun, but Nietzsche showed it more powerfully, and then Nordau put it into the political movement of Zionism after he had been a cosmopolitan. He had been a dedicated cosmopolitan until, of course, famously the affair, Dreyfus, the Dreyfus affair, and so and he had written his book, I think, on degeneration even before that, but I believe it already had a totally Nietzschean kind of aspect, and the aspect is kind of like there's some if there I guess the basis thesis of Antardoing is there could be a Shuna Zila or a sound spirit. So say Gauguin, for instance, who was sort of the upper middle class guy who had been successful in other things, and then suddenly he decided that he simply must become a painter and end up dying somewhere on a lonely beach in the some poor beach without much creature comfort. I don't know if that makes exact sense, but I mean, he looked kind of miserable when he died, I think. Maybe he had been sick for some time. But in any case, he could have lived out his life as a bourgeois, right? So this is the point of the Antardoing concept, is somebody who could achieve these things according to what the current society demands and what the generous and sound spirit would do, a sort of Shuna Sila. Then this is what Nordau's calling the degeneracy. So it's like it creates a choice about, like, are you going to use your liberal freedoms to become Van Gogh, to do some kind of pursuit of an extreme kind, and or are you going to follow the highest point as by the current social order? But I mean, I think Antardoing is struck by this problem that Nordau is looking at, when he's saying there's no real moral edicts. Their orgy is no longer sort of abiding. It's gone away. There's only these commands. There's only the commands which states use in order to govern and get things and make things happen. It breaks in a radical way into those two problems, I think, for Nordau at the time of the theoretical founding of. I mean, that's the thing. We all know there's somebody called Herzl, and he was much more practical, and that's how Israel got founded. But it's also that Nordau had the theory. That's what people don't notice, the high theoretical Nietzschean basis of Zionism. So, of course, you see that this same genus, this same dog shaking the waters off and exuberant sort of shake, both the Zionist thing and the Dritte Walpurgis thing. And so it's no wonder that and Zizek has mentioned that thing about this, I think Hannah Arendt and Einstein, and some people put out a New York Times ad warning about this in some sense. So yeah, we see it, and now we see two countries operating on the same wavelength. So I think we should consider that this in the light. Let me just bookend this with Strauss's sort of admonition here is that, so one, I think we can demonstrate that this is not Nietzsche's teaching. Nietzsche's not teaching skepticism. Rather, he's teaching the philosopher of the future, or this nihilism as this, or will to power as the eternal return, as this ground from which we can take orientation within this insanity. So he's not. That's the thing. He's trying to teach he has to have a ground from which he can try to. It's shown in Wilhelm Weisschädel's discussion between Nietzsche and Plato. Sort of, I think, the correct attitude we have to take towards Nietzsche's venture. But put it another way, Strauss is saying we shouldn't be too squeamish about admitting that, yes, these are kind of failed interpretations of Nietzsche, which then veered into this hyper cynical governance style. But at the same time, that's not Nietzsche's sort of, that's not fair to Nietzsche. It's sort of like saying, there's some dangers involved in the engagement with Nietzsche. It could derange your existence. You could become Max Nordau or a criminal and ruin your life.